Hello everyone, welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph, and we will be learning today Emir Tzah Hashem Daf Ayin Vav Amid Beis. We have a little bit left here on Ayin Vav Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn the halachos birchos HaShachar, and in the previous share we began to learn the halachos of birchas HaTorah, and that's what we are going to be continuing with. We pick up today on Ayin Vav Amid Aleph, Siman Mem Zayin. We're up to Sif Gimel in the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mechaber, HaKosev b'divrei Torah. If somebody is writing divrei Torah, he's not verbalizing divrei Torah, he's not learning out loud, but he's writing divrei Torah. HaKosev b'divrei Torah. Afal pisha einay koirei, even though he's not actually verbalizing the words, he's not reading the words, tzarich levarech, still in all, says the Mechaber, you have to say birchas HaTorah before you write divrei Torah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ois katan daled, hakosev, somebody who's writing. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, svira lei, the Mechaber holds, the ksiva odif mehirhur, that ksiva, writing divrei Torah, requires a bracha more than hamaharer b'divrei Torah. You see, very shortly in Sif Daled, we're going to learn the Shita of the Mechaber. The Shita of the Mechaber is Hamahar b'divrei Torah einoi tzarich levarich. Somebody who's thinking in learning, somebody who's thinking divrei Torah, is not required to recite birchas HaTorah beforehand. So you could wake up in the morning, according to the Mechaber, you went to sleep the night before in the middle of a shvera sugya, and now you wake up in the morning and you have the sugya going around in your mind. According to the Mechaber, that's fine. You don't have to say birchas HaTorah before you think in divrei Torah. Nevertheless, here in Sif Gimel, the Mechaber says that hakosev b'divrei Torah, if you're writing tzarich levarich, to write divrei Torah, you do have to say birchas HaTorah first. So Chavetz Chaim explains here in Ois Katan Daled why this discrepancy. Why is it that the Mechaber allows you to think in divrei Torah without birchas HaTorah, but to write divrei Torah, now suddenly you need a bracha? Says the Chavetz Chaim, Svirale de Ksiva Adif Me Hearer. Ksiva requires a bracha more than hearer. Fatam, possible reason for this is, Yesh Omrim, some say, and this is brought down from the Lavush, Yesh Omrim Mishum da Avid Maisa. The Lavush says, it's simply because when you're writing, you're actually doing a maisa, you're taking an action, you're doing something. When you're thinking, you're not doing anything. There's no physical maisa taking place. But when you write, there's already an action. V'yesh omrim, and there are others, Talmidei Rabbeinu Yoina, the Chayodam. V'yesh omrim, there are some that say that no, there's a different issue. The derech hakosev lahoitzi tovos mipiv b'shas haksiva. It's very common that when somebody is writing, he will end up enunciating the words that he's writing. And you see this sometimes. Somebody's sitting and writing, and you hear him start to say the words that he's writing. And since it's the derech for somebody who writes to end up enunciating the words, the halacha is you have to say birchas HaTorah before you sit down to write. Now, the first rationale that the Chavetz Chaim gave from the Lavush is mishum da avid maisa, because you're actually doing a maisa. So what? Well, speaking, I guess, even though very often in Chazal we say it's mili ba'alma, all it is words. I don't know how much of an action speaking really is, but there's also, we know that when you write something, it concretizes it more in your mind than when you simply think something. Sometimes even when you're learning, you're thinking through a sugya. Once you take pen to paper and you start writing, suddenly your thoughts become a lot more clear, a lot more in depth. You tend to think into it in greater depth once you're writing. So you see that there's a tremendous chashivus to the maisa of the writing, and maybe that's why it requires a bracha. Continues the Chavetz Chaim here in Ois Katan Daled. V'chol zeh b'kaisis svarim la'atzmai derech limudei. When we're talking about this whole question of whether or not writing divrei Torah requires a bracha, that, says the Chavetz Chaim, is only a discussion when somebody is writing in a notebook, he's writing notes for himself, derech limudai, as part of his learning, umevin mashu kaisev, and he understands what it is that he's writing, and he's thinking into what he's writing. Aval Sefer Hamatik, But if you have a sefer who's a scribe, I don't necessarily mean a sefer as in a sefer stam, somebody writes sefer Torah, tefillin, and mezuzos, but you have a scribe, a writer, somebody who's transcribing something. So maybe even he's just copying from one page onto another page, and he's just copying the words, he's just writing the words, but there's no machshava. He's not attempting to understand what he's writing. He's merely copywriting. That certainly does not require a bracha, says the Chavetz Chaim, de'ein zeh limud, because that's not limud Torah, that's not learning. All you're doing is writing. V'cholshkein, certainly im kaisev eze pasuk be'igeres or rishus ledaber tzachos. Let's say you write a pasuk. Very often you see by big people, you see by Rishonim, Achronim, that when they wrote their Svarim, they borrowed Lishonos from Psukim and Tanakh to make a point. So if somebody's writing a letter to his Chaver, and he uses a Lashon from a pasuk as part of the writing of the letter, that's not derech limud. He's just borrowing the words of the pasuk. L'daber tzachos, to speak in a clear, beautiful way. Einay tzarich levarich, that does not require a bracha. Because again, that has nothing to do with learning, so you don't need birchas HaTorah for that. Ulinyan Maisa, halacha l'maisa, says the Chavetz Chaim, and he brings this down over here from the Taz, the Magen Avraham, and the Gra. Ulinyan Maisa, hiskimu achreinim, the achreinim agree, shaloi lismai chaldas hamechaber, levarich alaksiva levada b'chol gavni. You should not rely on the mechaber and base your bracha of birchas HaTorah only on writing. So let's say somebody wants to sit down and he wants to write a good shtickle Torah. So he says, okay, the mechaber says a kaisev b'divrei Torah tzarich levarech. So he's going to go ahead, make birchas HaTorah, and he's not going to say birchas kaihanim. He's not going to say elu dvarim she'en lehem shiur. He's not going to do any of that. He's going to make birchas HaTorah, and then he's going to sit down and write. And that's it. That's going to be his learning. So the birchas HaTorah is going only on the writing that he's doing. Says the Mishnah Berurah that the Achronim agree that you should not do that. Because the bottom line is you don't have an action. The only thing that you see over here, I mean, you do have an action, you have the writing, but you don't have learning. You don't have anybody verbalizing Torah. Nobody's saying any words of Torah. All it is error. The learning is only being done behirur. The writing is not learning. The learning is behirur. And on here, we don't make a bracha. Ella, rather, says the Chavetz Chaim, Roi l'chol kaisev b'divrei Torah. It would be proper for anybody who's writing divrei Torah, sheyoytzi mipiv ktsas tovos lihinotzel mibracha levatala. He should make sure to at least speak out some of the words so that the bracha will go on that verbalization of the Torah. Im einay omer psuke birchas kaihanim my brayso delu dvarim achar bracha k'may shenoegen. Now, we don't really have this problem because 9.9 times out of 10, you went to shul in the morning, you said birchas HaTorah, and then right away you said Yivarecha Hashem Yishmerecha Yar Hashem Panav Elecha V'Chadeka Yisa Hashem Panav Elecha V'Yasem L'Cha Shalom, right? And then you said El Dvarim Shein Lehem Shir. So you said Psukim, you had Torah Shabbat, you had Torah Shabbat Peh, you said El Dvarim is a Mishnah and a Brisa. So 9.9 times out of 10, you're covered from this shaila, because now there's no longer a shaila of bracha levatala. You already verbalized Torah. The bracha could be chal on. The point of the Mishnah Berurah is that the Achronim agree, don't make the bracha solely on writing. Even though the Mechaber says that writing requires a bracha, but it's a point of contention, so don't do it based on writing alone. Now we go to Sif Daled, bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch. Hamaharer b'divrei Torah. Somebody who's thinking in learning. Einoi tzarich levarech is not required to make birchas HaTorah first. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Hey, Einoi tzarich. Why? To hear a lav kedibur dami. Because hearer is not like dibur. Thinking is not like speaking. And the bracha goes on speaking divrei Torah, not on just thinking divrei Torah. Ulafizan, based on this, says the Chavetz Chaim, Yesh lizayer la'oisan halomdin be'iyun mitoich hasefer. We should warn those people who are learning be'iyun. They're learning in depth, and they're looking at a sefer, but they're not verbalizing anything. Sheyizaru l'hoitzik tzas divrei Torah b'fach hara bracha. They should be careful to verbalize at least some divrei Torah after they say the bracha. Im einoi omer b'suke birchos kahanim oishar divrei Torah achar bracha k'moi shenoyagin. Okay, so here we have the mechaber, shitas mechaber, that a mahar b'divrei Torah einoi tzarich levarech. You could think in learning without a bracha, and the Chavetz Chaim explains that this is based on hearer lav kedibur dami, that hearer is not like dibur. And we can see this in the Mishnah in Birchos. The Mishnah in Birchos says that a baalei in the times of Tfilas Ezra, Takanas Ezra, when a baalei was usher in divrei Torah before he went to the mikveh, so the Mishnah says that a baalei should not recite Kriya Shema but mahar b'liboy, but he should think it in his mind. The Gemara says over there that obviously hearer is lav kedibur, because if a hearer, Gemara asks a stira actually over there. The Gemara says, I don't understand. All right, where's the, I should have Gemara. No. Oh, it's on the chaf. Okay. Yeah, so the Mishnah says, baalei mahar b'libai, ve'einu mavarech lo lefanei v'lo la'achrei. Baalei should be mahar Kriya Shema, but he doesn't make a bracha. So the Gemara says, Amar Ravina Zaysei Meres here kedibur dami. So first, Ravina says, you have a raya from this Mishnah that hearer thinking is kedibur. Disal kedaitach lav kedibur dami, because if hearer is lav kedibur dami, lama mahar. Why you bother thinking Kriya Shema? If hearer is lav kedibur, so thinking Kriya Shema doesn't accomplish anything. The Mishnah says that the baalei is mahar b'libai. Obviously, he's being yotze in the mitzvah. How's he being yotze in the mitzvah? It must be hearer is kedibur. Fact, the Gemara the other way. Elamai. So what are you going to tell me? Hearer kedibur dami? You're going to tell me that hearer is kedibur? He yotze b'svasav. So then he might as well speak it out. So the Gemara answers, Kedashkechan b'Sinai. This is based on what we find by Har Sinai. Taisus over here explains what does the Gemara mean. What the Gemara means is like this, that there's a duality over here. On the one hand, here is Kedibur. On the other hand, here is not Kedibur. Here is Kedibur to the extent that if a baalei is mahar Kriya Shema b'libai, he could be yotze the mitzvah of Kriya Shema. But it's not kedibur to the extent that a baalei is aser. Why? So the Gemara explains kedashkechan b'Sinai. You find that by Har Sinai, the Rebbeinu Shalom told Moshe Rabbeinu to tell Klal Yisrael that al tigshu el isha. They had to separate themselves from their wives, not separate, but they weren't able to have marital relations for 3 days before Kabbalas HaTorah. Why? Because by Har Sinai, there was dibur. Where was there dibur by Har Sinai? They listened to the dibur of Moshe Rabbeinu and the dibur of the Rebbeinu Shalom. So by Har Sinai, there was dibur. So when there's dibur, that's when al tigshu el isha applies. And Ezra based Takanas Ezra on that. And he said, a baalei is aser in Kriya Shema when there's going to be dibur. So he's not allowed to say Kriya Shema, but without going to the mikveh. But mahar, he could be mahar. So this question of hearer kedibur dami or hearer is lav kedibur dami is a little bit hair splitting. Here is kedibur dami to the extent that the balkari could be yotze kriyishma by just being mahar, but it's not kedibur dami to require him to have tefillah first. And over here the mechaber says that mahar b'divrei Torah doesn't require birchas HaTorah because it's not kedibur dami. Here is lav kedibur dami to the extent that it should require birchas HaTorah. Okay, now the reason I brought down the Gemara in Berachos and the Taisus in Berachos is because it's negayah to a very interesting shaila, and that is I'm saying this shir online, right? Now many of you are listening to this shir, and you never have any dibur. You can listen to the shir quietly, and you never have to move your lips even once. Now we have over here. We spoke about kaisev b'divrei Torah. We spoke about maharer b'divrei Torah. But how about shmiya? How about listening to divrei Torah? What if you want to go online and you want to listen to Rabbi Weiss's Dirshu shir? Do you have to say birchas HaTorah first? You want to call Torah anytime, and you want to listen to a nice shir on Torah anytime. Do you have to say birchas HaTorah first? Now, you might be very tempted to turn around and say, l'chayra, that's the shaila of hearer, right? That's what I'm doing. When I'm listening, I'm being mahar. So the question is, is that true? Is shmiya only hearer, or is shmiya more than hearer? After all, I could make a very good argument that shmiya is more than hearer. I hope I can make a powerful argument. My powerful argument would be, obviously all of you are sitting down with your phones or your computers to turn it on to listen to me, right? That means that without me, there's something that you would be lacking. So on your own hearer, maybe you wouldn't get too far, or maybe you wouldn't figure it all out. I hope I'm adding something. So obviously the reason you're sitting down to listen is because you're gaining from the shmiya. There's an added level to the learning when you're listening to somebody else. So is shmiya the same shaila as hearer? Or maybe shmiya needs a bracha even if hearer does not need a bracha. So there's an interesting footnote here. It's Dirshu footnote number 10, which starts on the page over here in the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah, but then it goes to the back to page 11 in the Miluim. So he says over here, Dirshu footnote number 10, V'hashemeya divrei Torah, somebody who's listening to divrei Torah, lo yuzkar b'Mishnah Berurah, the Mishnah Berurah does not discuss ha'im tzarich levarech, whether or not that person has to make a bracha. V'ashari tshuvas if gotten gimel kasa b'shem shalos tshuvas halachos ketanos, the shari tshuva brings down sheyavarech, that even according to the mechaber, shemeya l'divrei Torah, somebody who's listening to divrei Torah has to make a bracha, sheshmiya adifa mehirer, because listening is greater than hearer and it requires a bracha. Why? Mishum sheshemeya ka'oina. Let's all remember the concept of shemeya ka'oina. I could be mitzi you in a bracha. You never said the bracha. Shemeya ka'oina. When somebody listens with intent, that is akin to him having verbalized it himself. That's the concept of shemeya ka'oina. So when you listen to the shir, it's as if you're saying the shir. See that? You're on my gid shir now. On the other hand, B'shal Tzchusa Elef L'cha Shloimeh Sevish Adina Keher V'Ein Levarech V'Agoyer Chaim Kanievsky Kosav Shekol HaShemeya Shir B'Divrei Torah. Anybody who listens to a shir, Afilu B'Kaletes, even a cassette or a CD or a MP3 or whatever, or on Torah Anytime or on TorahClicks.com or on YouTube or on Vimeo, or by telephone, Tzarich Levarech. Reb Chaim Kanievsky paskin that shmiya you need a bracha. L'gra, according to the gra, this is true. Bishum shetzarich levarach al kol hearer. I didn't show it to you yet, but we're going to see in the Biur Halacha, the gra is chaylik on the mechaber. The mechaber paskins that hearer doesn't need a bracha. The gra holds that hearer does need a bracha. So, according to the gra, certainly you need a bracha of a shmiya because the gra holds you need a bracha for hearer. Va'af lecholkim ala gra. But even according to those who argue on the gra, b'shmiya tzarich levarech, you still have to make a bracha on shmiya. U'k'may shemuchach midivrei ha'tosfos Birchos chafam beis divrei maskil kida ashkechan sheshmias divrei Torah hi mitzvah b'fnei atzma. Shmiya b'divrei Torah is its own mitzvah of limud HaTorah. And that's the Taisus that I was quoting from Berachos, where Taisus learns Pshat in the Gemara kida ashkechan b'Sinai. The way Taisus is learning Pshat is that by Har Sinai, the reason the Rabbeinu Shalom said, Al Tikshu Elisha, the reason they had to abstain from marital relations for 3 days before Har Sinai was because there was Dibur, because Shemea Ka'oina. They listened to the Rabbeinu Shalom's Dibur, they listened to Moshe Rabbeinu's Dibur, Shemea Ka'oina. And therefore they were also b'divrei Torah if they were baalei keri. And therefore over here too, Shmiya in divrei Torah would require birchas HaTorah. Okay, now we go to the bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch here, Ayin Vav and Amalaf, the words of the Ramah. Hagah. V'hu adin de yachal lifsek din b'loi nisinas tam lidvarav. The Ramah adds in over here, he says, the Mechaber says that a mahar b'divrei Torah eino tzarech levarich. Says the Ramah, since mahar b'divrei Torah eino tzarech levarich, you could also paskin a shaila. But paskin a shaila means osir, mutter, kosher, puzzle. That's it. You're not giving any tam. You're not explaining. You're not teaching anything. That's not limud. That's just osir. You're not allowed to do it. Finished. That's not learning Torah. That's not teaching Torah. And therefore, says the Ramah, that could be done without birchas HaTorah. Back to Ayin Vav Amud Aleph, Mishnah Berurah is cut Vav, the Yachal, Nira Dafka Lifsag Din Ben Baalei Dinin De Einoi Derech Limud. The Mishnah Berurah uses very interesting phraseology over here, and now I remembered that I wanted to bring down an Aruch HaShulchan. Let me just pull out my Aruch HaShulchan over here. The phraseology of the Mishnah Berurah is, the Ramah said that you could paskin a din. You could paskin a halacha. Says the Chavetz Chaim, what does that mean? Nira dafka lifsag din ben baalei din and de'eno derech limud. That means that two people had a sichsuch, they had an argument, he owes me $100, no he doesn't, and you turn around and you say chayiv, or you say potter. You could paskin between baalei din. And that's not derech limud. That's not derech limud. That's not teaching Torah. Aval lilmai din b'sefer b'litam mevarich. But how about if you want to? Maybe you're teaching Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, or you're teaching Mishnah Berurah for that matter, right? So you want to give over a din without explaining the reason. So I'm going to tell you, you have to make birchas HaTorah bein lemikra, bein lemishnah, bein legemara, bein lemedrash. Right? Siman mem zayin sif beis. So I'm telling you a halacha. The halacha is you have to make birchas HaTorah whether it's for chumash, or for mishnayos, or for gemara, or for medrash rabbah. Rebbe, why? I'm not telling you why. So I gave you a halacha. I told you a halacha without a tam. Over there, the Mishnah Berurah says that you definitely have to say birchas HaTorah before you do that. That's certainly not any less than writing. We said that you have to make birchas HaTorah for writing. Right? So over here, to tell over somebody a halacha, certainly for that you have to make birchas HaTorah. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan, let me see if I can find it quickly. Bear with me, I'm sorry. No. right, I'm going to have to come back to it. Okay, I'm going to have to come back to it because I'm not finding it quickly. I prepared it last night, but now I can't find it somehow. Okay. There's a question over here. Like I said, the Mishnah Berurah says that you could paskin a din. It means lifsag din bein baalei dinin de'enei derech limud. Question is he coming to exclude, like I said, aser, mutter, kosher, puzzle? That's not between baalei din. Okay, I'm not going to take more time from the share of blank space. Mr. Hashem will come back to it. Okay, Ois Cotton Zion. So the Ramah said that you're allowed to paskin lifsag, and now here in Ois Cotton Zion, the Mishnah Berurah explains why this is so. Shahatam, because the rationale for the psak, shehu ikar adin, that's the real Torah. The real Torah is the rationale for the psak, not the psak. Einei ela mahar b'liba. That's only here. So the Pesach was asked a shaila, so he said Aser. Aser is not the Torah shabai. Aser is the practical manifestation of the Torah. For that, you don't need birchos HaTorah. And the rationale of the psak, the Pesach only has behir. That he's thinking. And on here, the mechaber paskin, you don't have to make a bracha. Continues the Chavetz Chaim over in Zayin v'agra. However, the gra in the Birurah gra is chaylik on this mechaber with svirale, and the gra holds the loigara zeme akayre mikra bovad so the tzarich levarich that this person who's paskening the din definitely has to make birchas HaTorah because it's no less than somebody who just reads a pasuk. Vayidaber Hashem Moshe lemar. Vayidaber Hashem Moshe lemar. Was there any groisa limud HaTorah over there? So you're right, Aser. There's no great limud HaTorah, but it's Torah. It's lasik b'divrei Torah. You're being oisik in divrei Torah. It requires a bracha. Va'afilu b'hiru levad machmir. And the truth is that the gra is machmir even with any hiru. Shaloi lahar kol zman shaloi berach birchas HaTorah. The gra was makbid that you should not be mahar in divrei Torah before birchas HaTorah. And turning back to Ayin Vav Amud Aleph. If you take a look at Bir Alacha Dibra Maschala Mahar B'Divrei Torah, he brings down the gra here. Ayin B'Bira Gra Shemaksha Alzeh. The Bira Gra asks on the Mechaber's psak. The Mechaber says HaMahar B'Divrei Torah Einim Tzarich Levarich. Frek the gra. I don't understand. The Haloi here B'Torah Hu Gam Kein Mitzvah. Here in Torah is Zichar a mitzvah. How do I know? Because it says in the Torah Kedosha, "V'hagisa b'yomam v'layla." Right? How often do we quote that pasuk? V'hagisa b'yomam v'layla. What does v'hagisa mean? Yil l'rotzayin imrei fi. We ask the Rabbeinu Shalom that our words, the words of our mouths, should find favor. Yil l'rotzayin imrei fi. The words of our mouths should be favorable. V'hegyoin libi. And the thoughts of my heart should be favorable. Lefanecha. So what's hegyon libi? The thoughts of my heart. So what's v'hagisa b'yom v'alayla? V'hagisa incorporates thinking in divrei Torah. So the Gra says, how could the Mechaber say that thinking doesn't require birchas HaTorah? Thinking in divrei Torah is one of the mitzvahs of limud HaTorah, is thinking in divrei Torah. So the Gra takes great issue with this. Now let's turn back to Ayin Vav Amud Beis. Three lines down in the Mishnah Berurah. This is a shaila that people come with sometimes. They want to know, can I take a little of an esrog before I said birchas HaTorah? Right? The answer is yes. It's a pulas mitzvah. It's not limud Torah. Even though when you take the lulav and the esrog, you're going to be thinking about the halachos, the lulav and esrog, afilu hachi mutter, that's still mutter even according to the gra. The chol she'enim eskaven l'limud ain't tzarich bracha. Because over there your kavanah is not limud Torah. Your kavanah is to the ma'aseh mitzvah, to do the mitzvah properly. That's not limud HaTorah. Okay, now we move along, top line, Ayin Vav Amud Beis in the Mechaber Sifhei. Birchas HaTorah, what are these brachos of birchas HaTorah? And this here we're going to get into a fascinating topic. Birchas HaTorah, Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu. We thank the Rabbeinu Shalom who was mekadesh us with his mitzvahs. When we do mitzvahs lishma, we become more kadosh. So Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu, and the lashon of the mechaber is al divrei Torah. Now, if you look at the berachos over here on the side, he brings down from the Rosh, the cause of a Rosh HaTorah sheyesh oimrim lasoik b'divrei Torah, which is the lashon that we're familiar with. V'chein hu nusach Ashkenaz uPolanya, and that was the nusach in the regions of Ashkenaz and Poland. So not the lashon, not the text that the mechaber has, Asher kedishanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu al divrei Torah, but rather Asher kedishanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu lasoik b'divrei Torah. That's bracha number 1. Then we continue v'harevna. Then we have a second paragraph, and whether this paragraph constitutes a second bracha of birchas HaTorah, or whether it is a continuation of the first bracha of birchas HaTorah, is something that we're going to discuss very shortly in the Mishnah Berurah. It's actually a rather complex question, but we have this paragraph. The mechaber has a vav. Ve'harev no Hashem Elokeinu es divrei sarasacha b'finu u'v'fiyah yisamecha beis Yisrael v'niya anachnu v'tzetzeinu, and some say v'tzetzai tzetzeinu amcha beis Yisrael kulon yodei shemecha v'lomdei sarasecha l'shma baruch atah Hashem amalami Torah li'amu Yisrael. And then continues the mechaber v'asher bachar banu. And then you have either the second or the third bracha, but the final bracha of birchas HaTorah is the bracha of Asher Bachar Banu, Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim v'Nasal es Torasai Baruch Atah Hashem Noisein HaTorah. Now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah over here. Mishnah Berurah is Katan Ches. Al Divrei Torah. The gears of the mechaber is Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu al Divrei Torah. U'mining Medina Seinu Loimer Lasik b'Divrei Torah. In our Medina, the minig is to make a bracha Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu la'asoik b'Divrei Torah, to be engaged and to be busy with Divrei Torah, not al Divrei Torah. It reminds me of a favorite saying of a Rebbe of mine from way in the past, my Manal from Yeshiva Ketana in Yeshiva Tarasemis in Borough Park, Rabbi Elias Schwartz, who used to say, and he had it on signs all over the yeshiva, he used to say, I strive not to make a 24-hour Torah learning Jew. I want to make a 24-hour Torah living Jew. You see, Torah is not something that we just learn, like we had it in the previous year, in the beginning here, of Hilchos Birchas HaTorah. It's not something which we learn like any other chachma, like learning history, or learning engineering, or learning mathematics. So another guy enjoys the intellectual pursuit and the mental gymnastics of Torah. That's not what it is. It's not just an intellectual pursuit. It's a derech hachayim. We're learning a way of life. The Torah is supposed to imbue our entire life with Kedusha. So Rabbi Schwartz used to say, I want to make a 24-hour Torah living Jew. So it's a lasoik b'divrei Torah, because we're constantly engaged in divrei Torah, not only when we're in the Beis HaMedrash, but even when we're in our workplace. No matter what it is, no matter where you are, in the bank, in the post office, no matter what it is that you're doing, you're engaged in divrei Torah. Continues the Mishnah Berurah here as Katan Ches. Ger yachal loimer birchas Asher Bachar Banu. A ger, a convert, could make the bracha of Asher Bachar Banu. Somebody might say, wait, how could he make such a bracha? The Rebbeinu Shalom did not choose him. The Rebbeinu Shalom made him an Eino Yehudi. Later on in life, he used his own bechira, and he decided to join the tribe, and now he has a chiyuv to learn Torah. But that's not the Rebbeinu Shalom choosing him. How could he say Asher Bachar Banu? But the answer is it's not true. The answer is that he could make a bracha. One of the reasons is because it's a pasuk. The pasuk in Chumash says, Chuka achas lochem v'lager hagor. There's one Torah for you and for the ger. I chose the ger. I did choose the ger because I chose gerim. I chose gerim. So now you're a ger. You have a chiv of limud Torah because I chose you. Also, the Torah chose the ger. The Torah was mezakeh the ger somehow to see things, hear things, whatever it is, but somehow the Rebbeinu Shalom was mezaki him and led him down a path where he was able to use his bechira to go ahead and become a yid. Otherwise, somebody might live somewhere he might not even have met a Jew in his life. What does he know about Torah? What does he know about Yiddishkeit? Nothing. But this person, the Rebbeinu Shalom was mezaki him and put him into the right circumstances that led him to become a Jew. Ice contest. The second paragraph of birchas HaTorah is V'harevna. Now, in V'harevna, we have over there, this is why I read the whole paragraph, we have in there, V'niya anachnu v'tzetzaenu. We asked the Rabbanan Shalom that us and our descendants, Amcha Beis Yisrael, your nation, Klal Yisrael, should be, Kulanu, Yoidei Shemecha, we all should know your name, lomdei Sarasecha, and we should learn your Torah, Lishma. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the way I read it now, I stopped at Tzetzaenu, our offspring. V'niya anachnu, we should be Yoidei Shemecha, and lomdei Sarasecha, v'tzetzaenu, and our offspring should be Yoidei Shemecha, v'lomdei Sarasecha. Says the Mishnah Berurah here, nice cut and test. There are those who are careful to add the offspring of our offspring. They mention grandchildren. They mention another dar in the tefillah. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ki kol mishu tamid chacham, anybody who's a tamid chacham, ubenoi, and his son is a tamid chacham, uben benoi tamid chachamim, and his son's children. So his grandchildren al Talmidei Chachamim, Shuv ein HaTorah Pezekes Mizaroi, that person could be assured that the Torah will never leave his offspring. If he is a Talmid Chacham, his son is a Talmid Chacham, and he has a grandson of Talmid Chacham, that's 3 generations in a row Talmidei Chachamim, then he could be assured that the Torah will not leave his family. Shenemar, because we have a pasuk in Yeshaya that says, Rebbeinu Shalom gives us havtacha, gives us a promise. Lo yamushu mipicha, the Torah will not leave your mouth. Umipi zaracha, and your children's mouths. Umipi zera zaracha, and from the mouths of your children's children. So when the pasuk gives the promise of lo yamush, that the Torah will not leave, the Torah couches it in 3 generations. So therefore, when we're mispal, we should be mispal for 3 generations. But the Mishnah Berurah says, "Vein tzarich lakach." This is not really necessary. Ki bechlal v'tzetzaenu hu gam kemenei banim. Because when you say v'tzetzaenu means our descendants, and that includes grandchildren. Ice cut and yud. The third paragraph of birchas HaTorah is Asher Bachar Banu. Beautiful Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, "V'tamid tiyeh tfilas ha'av v'ha'em shigura b'fihem." A mother and a father should always have the tefillah, the prayer, shigura b'fihem, very fluent in their mouths. It means that they should be mispal all the time. Lehispal al b'neihem, to daven for their children, sheyu lomdei Torah, that they should be lomdei Torah v'tzadikkim baalei midos tovos. Mother and a father should always be busy and be engaged in davening for their children, that they should be lomdei Torah, tzadikkim, not only lomdei Torah, but also tzadikkim, not only tzadikkim, but also baalei midos tovos. V'yechaven ma'oid, and the Mishnah Berurah says that we should have strong, powerful intent. We should concentrate greatly. Birchas avarabo, when we say the bracha of avarabo or nusach sfard avasolam in Shachris before Kriya Shema, birchas HaTorah, and when we say birchas HaTorah, we should have intense concentration to be mispal for our children. We say laman loinigal, so we should not put in our efforts for nothing. And we shouldn't produce offspring labahola, for nothing, for bahala, for wasting time, for confusion. We want that our offspring should be lomdei Torah, tzadikkim, baalei midos, not behola. Our offspring should not chas v'chalila just be confusion and without a life and not purposeful and not valuable. Okay, now let's go to Sivav. Sivav is where things start to get, I would say, interesting, but it's all interesting. But here in Sif Hey, the Mechaber told us about 3 parts of birchas HaTorah. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysav etzivanu lasik b'divrei Torah. Harevna, which the Mechaber said begins with a vav, veharevna. And lastly, Asher bachabanu mikol ha'amim. Says the Mechaber here in Sivav, Oimer veharevna im vav. The Mechaber says, I was very careful. When I said in Sif Hey veharevna, I meant what I said and I said what I meant. It should be veharevna with a vav. Haga, Ramaz Chalik. The Ramaz says v'yeshomer baalei vav. The Ramaz says there are those that say without a vav, harevna. Now again, it's an interesting Ramah. We had something like this already earlier. Says the Ramah, v'chei nagu. And the minig is without a vav. Okay, and he brings this down from the Rambam, the Rashba, the Abu Darham. Aval, however, says the Ramah, Yoser Toiv Loimar Bivav. It would be best to say it with a vav. So we have the Mechaber, vav. We have a Yesh Omrim, no vav. We have a Ramah, minig, no vav. Then the Ramah says, but you know what's best? With a vav. Okay, so we're going crazy over this vav. What's up with this vav? What's going on with this vav? What's the whole shaila with this vav? Fascinating topic. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Yod Aleph, vav. Why should there be a vav? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, the bracha achasi. The reason there should be a vav is because we know vav moisef al inyan rishon. What's the prefix of a vav in Hebrew? And. So says the Chavetz Chaim, the reason the Mechaber wants a vav is because according to the Mechaber, the first 2 paragraphs of birchas HaTorah are all one long bracha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu lasik b'divrei Torah v'harevna. And we connect the second paragraph to the first blessing. V'harevna. And sweeten the words of Torah in our mouths, but it's all one bracha. Until Baruch atah Hashem ha'olam b'Torah le'am Yisrael. And then the bracha of Asher b'chabanu is the second bracha. So again, the Mechaber holds the first 2 paragraphs are all one bracha. So Mamela, you need a vav. Now, how does the Mechaber know this? What makes the Mechaber say that the first 2 paragraphs are one bracha? And this is where it gets very interesting. So, there's a concept of a bracha hasmucha lechaverta. Let me remind you, we spoke about this already. In the morning, we make a bracha of Asher Yotzar. We also make a bracha of Elokai neshama shenasati b'Torah. We learned that there are those that hold that the bracha of Elokai neshama shenasati b'Torah is what's called a bracha hasmucha lechaverta. It's a bracha that is close and intended to be connected to another bracha. If you notice, the bracha of Elokai neshama does not start with baruch, right? It starts Elokai. At the end, Baruch atah Hashem hamachzir neshamas of garmesim. But it doesn't start with Baruch. It starts with Elokai. Where's the Baruch? Where's the psicha? Where's the opening of that bracha? So there are those that hold that bracha is a bracha smucha lechaverta. It's a bracha that was intended to come on the heels of another bracha. It's supposed to be attached to another bracha. Which bracha? The bracha of Asher Yotzar. The bracha of Asher Yotzar is a bracha that we make on the wonders of the guf, of the physical body. Elokai neshama is a bracha on the neshama. Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. Right? So it's the duality of the guf and the neshama. So there are those that say that these 2 brachas are supposed to be connected. And because they're connected, Elokai neshama doesn't have to start with a baruch, because it leans on the first bracha. And that's why we say Elokai neshama right after Asher Yotzar. So we have this concept that a bracha smucha lechaverta does not need its own psicha. It doesn't have to be paisakas bebaruch. It doesn't need a baruch at the beginning. Question is, why not? So there's 2 shittas, like so many other things that we go through. There's one shitta that holds that the reason a bracha smucha l'chaverta doesn't need its own baruch is because the opening baruch of the previous bracha is the psicha for the bracha of the second bracha. So that would mean, using again the example of Asher Yotzar on the kind of Shama, when you say Asher Yotzar and you say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Asher Yotzar Es Ha'adam B'Chachma, that Baruch Atah Hashem, that's the opening bracha not only for Asher Yotzar but also for Elokai Neshama. Okay, then there's another shita. The other shita holds no. It's not the opening baruch of the previous bracha. That's the psicha for the second bracha. It's the second baruch, the chasima, the closing baruch of the first bracha is the psicha for the second bracha. What do I mean? There are two baruchs in Asher Yotzar. There's Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Asher Yotzar, and then at the end there's Baruch Atah Hashem Roifei Chabasar or Mafli Lasos. So the question over here is, which Baruch Atah Hashem of Asher Yotzar is the opening for Elokai Neshama? Is it the first one, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Asher Yotzar, or is it Baruch Atah Hashem Roifei Chabasar or Mafli Lasos? One of them is the opening Baruch for Elokai Neshama, but there's two different opinions which one. Okay, what's the difference? Oh, I'll tell you a very interesting difference. Well, we make a whole bunch of brachos that we just finished learning the halachos about. We make all the birchas hashachar. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Asher Nasa L'Sech V'Vino L'Afka Ben Yom U'Vein Loila. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Shaloi Asani Goy. Wait a second. Why does Shaloi Asani Goy need its own baruch? Why isn't Shaloi Asani Goy a bracha smucha l'chaverta? It comes right on the heels of Hanoisen L'Sech V'Vino L'Afka Ben Yom U'Vein Loila. So why does it need its own baruch? So, according to the shita that the opening baruch is the opening for the second bracha, you have a valid kasha. The Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, that should be, of Hanoisen L'Sech V'Vino, that should be the open bracha for Shaloi Asani Goy. But according to the other shita, that it's the closing baruch, these brachas don't have closing baruchs. They only have one baruch. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Hanoisen L'Sech V'Vino L'Afka Ben Yom U'Vein Loila. There is no closing baruch. So since there's no closing baruch, the second bracha is not a bracha smucha l'chaverta. So here you have an nafkamina between the two shitas. Now, this style of bracha that does not have a closing baruch, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Shakol Niyeh B'Dvarei. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam B'rei Minim Azaynos. None of these brachas have closing baruchs. Asher Yotzar has a closing baruch. The brachas that don't have a closing baruch, they are called brachos kitzaros, short brachas. Short brachas don't have a closing baruch. So there's a concept that when you have a bracha hasmucha l'chaverta that's attached to a bracha kitzara, then the second bracha needs its own baruch. Okay, now, all complicated. What does it have to do with the topic at hand? What does it have to do with Asher Kedishanu B'Mitzvayis V'Tzivan Lasik B'Divrei Sarah and V'harevna? Oh, so let's take a deep dive over here. Let's take a look at Mishnah Berurah is Katan Vav. The Mechaber says you should put a Vav by V'harevna because V'harevna is a continuation of Asher Kedishanu B'Mitzvayis V'Tzivan Lasik B'Divrei Sarah. It's all one bracha, says the Chavetz Chaim. The bracha Akasiya is cut in Yod Aleph. How does the Mechaber know it's one bracha? Oh, the ilu haisa bracha bifnei atzma, because the Mechaber reasons if the paragraph of Harivna was a separate bracha, if it was a separate second bracha, haisa paisakas bebaruch, it would need a baruch. Why doesn't it have an opening? If it's a second bracha, so it should be Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kedishanu B'Mitzvayis V'Tzivanu Lasik B'Divrei Sarah. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Harevna Divrei Sarasacha B'Vinu. Why doesn't it have a baruch at the opening? Must be it's not a separate bracha. But wait a second. Maybe it doesn't have a baruch because it's a bracha smucha l'chaverta. So says the Chavetz Chaim. Va'af al gav de smucha l'chaverti. Even though you might ask, well, what do you mean? Maybe it is a second bracha, but the reason it doesn't have an opening The reason it doesn't start with baruch is because it's a bracha smucha lechaverta. Says the Chafetz Chaim, no. According to the Mechaber, that's not a good argument. Mikam makayim, keven the brachos kitzara is hein. Since the first bracha asher kedushanim b'mitzvayis v'sivan olasik b'divrei Sarah is a bracha kitzara, it doesn't have a closing baruch. Have a lehu liftayach bebaruch. Oh, so what is the Chafetz Chaim saying here so far? He says, the Mechaber says, harevna needs a vav. V'harevna. Why? Because it's a continuation of Asher Kiddushanim Mitzvahs of Sivan Olasik B'divrei Sarah. How do we know? Because if it was a separate bracha, it would start with a baruch. Why does it have to start with baruch? Maybe it's a bracha smucha lechaverta. No. If it was a separate bracha, it would need a baruch, even though it's a bracha smucha lechaverta, because Lasik B'divrei Sarah is a bracha kitzara. And since it's attached to a bracha kitzara, it needs its own baruch. So it must be that the reason it doesn't have a baruch is because it's not an independent bracha. It's a continuation of the first bracha. And the Chafetz Chaim brings another raya to this concept that brachas hasmuchos lechaverta get their own baruch at the front if they're attached to a bracha kitzara. Meaning to have a birchas havdalah. Havdalah is another very good case of this. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam baalei mina pesamim. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam baalei aish. Why does aish start with baruch? It's a bracha smucha lechaverta to baalei mina pesamim. So why does it get its own baruch? The answer is because it's attached to a bracha kitzara. Baalei mina pesamim is a bracha kitzara, so it needs its own baruch. So too, if harev na was a second bracha, it would need a baruch, even though it's a bracha smucha lechaverta, because it's attached to a bracha kitzara. Midid hava brachas havdalah shepaisches bebaruch afal pi shein smuchais keven shein kitzaris. Okay, so we have a very valid explanation for the Mechaber. But now what do we do for the Yesh Omrim? We have a Yesh Omrim that says no vav. We have a Yesh Omrim that says that harevna is a separate bracha. So why doesn't it have a baruch? Oh. V'yesh Omrim svira lehu dishani birchos havdalah she'enon smuchais. The Yesh Omrim holds that really harevna is a separate bracha. If it's a separate bracha, so where's the baruch? Oh, it doesn't get a baruch. Why doesn't it get a baruch? Because it's a bracha smucha lechaverta. Yeah, but I don't understand. It's a bracha smucha lechaverta, but it's only attached to a bracha kitzara that doesn't have a closing. So why doesn't it get its own baruch? Oh, because the Yesh Omrim holds like the Shita that it's the opening baruch of the previous bracha that covers the opening for the second bracha. So what about the brachas of Havdalah? Why do they have a baruch? Why don't we say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam baalei mina pesamim u'baalei aish, and let the opening baruch of baalei mina pesamim be the opening baruch for baalei aish? Answers the Mishnah Berurah, the shani birchas havdalah she'enon smuchos. See, you're making a mistake, says the Chafetz Chaim, according to the Yesh Omrim. The bracha of baalei aish is not a bracha smucha lechaverta to baalei mina pesamim. Just because one bracha comes right after another bracha, that does not make it a bracha smucha lechaverta. Explains the Chafetz Chaim, Shem ratza omer kalecha b'fnei atzmai, ala ner v'ala b'samim. Says the Chafetz Chaim, the bracha of baalei mina pesamim is a standalone bracha. Whenever you want to pick up a thing of cloves and smell it, you want to do it on Yom Kippur to make sure you have mei brachas, you make a baalei mina pesamim. On Motzei Tisha B'Av, sometimes you're going to make a baalei aish if it's Sunday night, even though you're not doing a full of dollar, you're not making a baalei mina pesamim, but you're going to make a baalei aish. So baalei aish, sometimes you make as a standalone. Baalei mina pesamim you make as a standalone. Harevna is never a standalone. Harevna is a part of a series of birchos HaTorah. So the Yesh Omrim holds that harevna is a second bracha. Why doesn't it start with baruch? Because it's a bracha smucha lechaverta. It's a bracha smucha lechaverta to a bracha kitzara. So what? I don't care if it's attached to a bracha ktsara, as long as there's a baruch at the beginning of the previous bracha, and there is baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'sayis v'tzvanu lasik b'divrei Sarah. That opening baruch is the opening for the second bracha of a harivna. So even though it's a bracha smucha lechavertu to a bracha kitsara, it still doesn't need a baruch. And mechaber, you don't have a raya that it's not an individual bracha. It is an individual bracha. Okay, I know we're going long, but let's finish this sif. Let's do Mishnah Berurah's cut yud beis. Finally, the Ramah concluded, and he said, Yoser Tov, the best thing is that you should say the vav. Why? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, because with the vav we can be yoytz everybody. In other words, even if it's two brachas, it's okay. So the second bracha starts with a vav. So what? The harivna, an independent bracha could start with a vav, and if it's a continuation of the first bracha like the mechaber, it's certainly good. Avalim toimar b'loi vav, but if you say harivna and you don't put in a vav, have you harivna bracha b'fnei atzma, then certainly you're making harivna a separate bracha. They have a hefsik l'oisadei shesvir la bracha achasi, and then you would be making a hefsik. V'chein nagim kayayim loymar v'hariv b'vav. When it comes to the question of if you hear somebody making birchas HaTorah, should you say amen after Asher Kiddushanim Mitzvahs of Tzivanu Lasik B'divrei Sarah? Yeshtei Bein Achrayim. This is a matter of dispute amongst the Achrayim. V'roiv Achrayim mitzadim mishaloi ladis amen. Roiv Achrayim say you should not respond amen. V'nachen sheyivarach hamavarach brachas u'balachach. Chavetz Chaim says the best thing would be that when you make the bracha of Asher Kiddushanim Mitzvahs of Tzivanu Lasik B'divrei Sarah, you should make the bracha quietly so that the listener does not get involved in this shaila of whether or not to say amen. Okay, fascinating topic. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schos of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send Yeshua Sefurus Parnasset Shidduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the B'yis Gal Tzedek B'meher V'Yameinu Amen. Be well.